UWITV now presents the Association of Caribbean Higher Education Administrators 18th Annual Conference under the theme, New Times, New Approaches to Higher Education. Here now is the first session of Day 1.
I am pleased to welcome Miss Adriana Lavalle to our keynote speaker. There are a few things I'd like to tell you about her. First of all, she's an attorney at law, admitted to practice in Mexico and US. She has over 20 years of experience in cross-national financing for both public and private sector development. And in the public sector, she has held several positions within the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit of Mexico and as advisor at the board of directors of several financial institutions of the IDB group. Could you please put your hands together to welcome Ms. Lavalle?
What I'm going to be discussing today is really based on the work that IDB has done. We had a recent publication called Learning Better, Public Policy for Skills Development. And it has the presentation also has a lot of inputs from other recent publications on higher education. And this presentation, when it comes, it'll describe recent trends in higher education in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'll give an overview of the trends and touch on some of the current challenges. Something that, nothing new for you, because I'm sure you're aware of what are those challenges. I'm going to be talking about key issues from the perspective of the student and the school system. Okay. And you know that, can you help me? Those issues are really referred to access, the quality of the education, relevance, and the financing. So as I mentioned earlier, this will be a quick outline. Diagnostic of higher education in Latin America and the Caribbean. We'll discuss the challenges. I'm going to expand more on why it's important to expand access and why it's important to control quality. And we'll reach together a couple of very key important conclusions. Let me give you a disclosure warning before I start. You will see a lot of information from Latin America. Unfortunately, in the Caribbean, and this is a message that I want to to send to all of you, in the Caribbean, institutions are not registering data and they're not disclosing data. It's very hard to assess, very hard to evaluate, to reflect and improve if we don't keep that data organized and if it's not disclosed and analyzed. So I'm just putting that out there from the get-go. Okay, looking at the global perspective. If you see at the graph, it's very clear if you look at the greens. Since 2010, higher education has experienced a dramatic change as enrollment has increased significantly across the world. If you see, Latin America has had one of the largest increases, with enrollment moving from 18% in 1996 to 44% in 2014. As the graph shows, Latin America has a higher enrollment than the world average. Compare Latin America to the world, it's higher. However, it's still lagging behind Central and Eastern Europe and North America and Western Europe. So why is expansion of higher education important? Because as more people have access to higher education, they have an opportunity to enhance their skills and knowledge and thereby increase their productivity. Our countries need skilled, highly educated workers, what economists call human capital. We need higher skilled workforce in order to advance economically and socially. Higher education can give people more social mobility and can reduce inequality. What do I mean about that? Reducing inequality, meaning that reducing the gap between rich and poor, and reducing the gap in opportunities between urban and rural. Okay. Compared to the earlier slide that shows the changes in enrollment across the globe, this one focuses on Latin America. And we see a dramatic growth in higher education in countries as Brazil, from 11% in 1994 to 39% in 2014. Chile from 26% in 1994 to 61% in 2014. This dramatic expansion in access is due to public and private efforts. In many countries, there has been an expansion of private universities that contributed to this increased space in higher education. But as I mentioned earlier in the last slide, this expansion is very positive because more people with more qualifications and knowledge will contribute to the economic and social development of our countries. I'm sure you've noticed, again, that the Caribbean countries are not represented in this graph. But as I mentioned earlier, when we were preparing this, we found out the Caribbean data is not that easily accessible. I tried to include the Caribbean whenever the data was possible, but so just as I said, keep that in mind when you go back to see how we can start tracking more data and disclosing it. Now, I have some data in the Caribbean coming from IDB work that shows that the same pattern of increased enrollment holds true for the Caribbean. We can see that over time, more people have access to higher education. If we look at the age cohorts, let me see if I can find the, there we go. Age cohort by year, by birth year, we see that in average, in the Caribbean, the enrollment has increased dramatically. But what is shocking about this graph is that we see a huge gap between boys and girls. Girls, boys. We have a problem with the boys. They're lagging behind. And that's something that we need to rethink as educators and as administrators, how we can tap right here. These diamonds right here. We need to tap the, right? So that's an issue I would like to flag. Next, no. Right. In addition, when we look at, so we already established there's more access, so that's good, right? But let's look again. Who is getting into the education, higher education level? Who? When we look at the graph, we see that who's gaining access is really, in the last decades, the higher quintiles. Let's look at the numbers. As you can see from the scale of the side, over the years, the students from quintiles 1 and 2, which are the red dots, those represent the students from the poorest families. They're staying down here. Despite the efforts of increasing access, they're staying down there. Whereas we see that there's definitely more access to higher education over time, but it's the 5th quintile, meaning those are the blue dots. People with their wealthier and have more access to education. So we see an increased enrollment, but we see, unfortunately, a gap in terms of the targeted beneficiaries. So lower quintiles are still lagging down. It's a very interesting case. For example, look at Honduras. They made a huge effort to increase and target access of education, and there was a huge jump. But unfortunately, the jump is with the blue dot. Why is that? Because the instrument they used was financial instruments through lending. And of course, banking institutions look at repayment modules. And if you can't afford a loan, you cannot afford getting into university. Okay. The others, let me see if I can get the next one. There. So we see a similar pattern in the Caribbean. That is that more students are getting in universities, and we're seeing that those are the students are the traditionally ones that were excluded. We have data from Jamaica from 2015 under the survey of living conditions that shows that students born from 2001 to 2010 and forward, look at particularly quintile 1, gain more access to higher education, but look, it's only 10%. This is still low compared to the rates of enrollment of this quintile in other countries in Latin America. So we see improvement, but not enough. Also, it's very clear that the quintile 5th, the richest in Jamaica maintains the highest rate of enrollment in higher education. Although it's higher, it still remains low compared to other Latin American countries. Under 35% compared to most countries above 70 in 2014 in the previous graph. The fact that students have less access to higher education in the Caribbean, even for the upper quintile, translates into a considerable loss of capacity and talent in the region. By not tapping into them, we're losing new engineers, doctors, and who knows, Nobel Prizes. We're missing in that talent. Graph 8. I went too fast, I think. This graph compares earnings compared to secondary. Yes. So now the question is, we're increasing the number of students in higher education. Is it worth it? In this new world, changing world, where we see examples of people that only have high school or dropouts of universities making a lot of money, there's a lot of, I have a teenager who's always asking me, why do I have to go to university? And he starts giving me examples of names that I won't say here because you know them. They've invented the gadgets that we are all using, right? But we have data that's even now today, it's still worth attending public higher education. So when you look at the graph, this graph compares earnings of students with secondary education, with high school, and higher education or university level. And this graph shows that with more education you earn more money. That is in general terms. So even though there's examples of university dropouts that make millions, the reality is that for the majority, investing in university still makes sense and it still has a good rate of return. That's what we show here in the data that we have. That said, if you combine that we see a high rate of dropouts in universities, we need to analyze the information. We've seen that more students are enrolling, but we're very concerned that even though there's more access, we need to ask ourselves how well the students that are getting in, how well prepared they are when they come in, and how well the programs prepare them for entering the workforce. If you see this graph, it's really troubling. The statistics show that students enroll, but they don't all finish their degrees. Right? You see, it clearly shows that it's a high percentage of students do not complete their programs. Look at the numbers in Central America and the Caribbean. 63% do not complete. In Brazil, 59%. Chile, 54%. Mexico, 33%. Honduras, 49%. Colombia, 48%. And Argentina, 49%. So what's going on? When we look at this dropout rates, we can see it explained in different ways. One, students may drop because the secondary program didn't prepare them well enough to be ready for university. And by the time they get to university, they're burned out and they give up. That's one reason. Another one is that it could indicate that the quality of the program they got into was not very good. That could be another reason. Once they're there, students realize that they will find no employment in their chosen field. That's another possibility. Or simply, they cannot afford continue paying the fees of the university. Dropping out can also mean that young persons get a better understanding of what they want to do. So they get enrolled, and over time they realize, you know what, I really don't want to be a doctor. I really want to be an engineer. And those shifts happen. But one solution to solve the dropout conundrum is maybe to envision programs that offer shorter, more flexible programs that would allow them to, I don't want to call it making a mistake in the selection, but allow them to explore. And the offerings of university have to be agile and have to be flexible to allow the student to explore first and then decide. Otherwise, we're wasting a lot of resources in the process with it. Because once the student gives up, it's very hard for them to come in. So this is a big loss for not only the universities, but also the country. I mentioned that having dropouts have consequences not only in the earnings for them, but it's also a cost to the university and the society. So now let's think about how, from the perspective of the students. Are they seeing the benefits of their investment when they come out, entering the workplace? We found very interesting data. If you look at the graph, you see that students from university level, I'll give you two examples, Colombia and Chile, where we have a lot of data. 70% of university students say it's okay. They invested in university and they get out and get a good job, and 70% say it's okay, it's working out for them. Same thing happens in Chile. But look at the staggering number on technological programs that were supposed to help alleviate those confused students that they weren't really sure they wanted to invest 5 years or 4 years in really strong academic rigorous degree. They go to technology or associates-like programs thinking that they will come up and with that degree they'll get a better job. The number is really scary. Look at 41% of them are happy with the results. 59%, almost 60% of them, they don't see it that way. And half of the same trend happens in Chile. So what's happening in the design of these technological programs that were supposed to help retain, engage the students and prepare them better for the labor force? Right? So one thing that we're thinking how we can address this concern is to start developing and understanding the importance of quality assurance, and most importantly, sharing information about the content of the program so that students start choosing and choosing well. So what's the real challenge? The real challenge is to expand access, but control for quality. Right? We need to have that balance. We expand access, but not just create programs to attract more students. Let's keep an eye on the quality, and with quality also being think of them how they're going to enter in the workforce. So I'm going to touch on 3 areas that could solve this conundrum. One is thinking of different ways of financing mechanisms. Help provide better information to potential students so they can choose better, and have more engagement and very close partnerships with private sector to ensure that their students that are graduating are going to have a job at the end of their career. The career, I'm thinking in Spanish. Career is la carrera, when they finish school. And just make. And when I get nervous, let me disclose this. When I get nervous, I start thinking in Spanish. Even though I live in Jamaica, I start thinking in Spanish and I question myself. So forgive me about that. Please be patient. So I mentioned one of the mechanisms is to improve the financing of financial higher education. Currently, all higher education systems in Latin America receive funds from the government through direct financing. These budgets, as you know, are negotiated and they're established on a very ad hoc basis. There is very little innovation in financing instruments as assignment of public funds to institutions based on performance criteria or incentives to quality. Here we when I talk about innovative instruments, I talk about competitive funds. We have examples in Chile and Argentina, and these funds, as the name says, they promote quality improvements to build capacity in universities. There's others, they're called performance contracts, and they're widely used in France, Finland, Denmark. We have cases in Latin America, Chile and Costa Rica. But this financing mechanism, even though they're used, they represent a very small portion of the financing of the university. It's only 5 to 10% of their total annual budget. There's other systems called like the voucher type payments to institutions, and these are linked to inputs or performance-based outputs. We have the examples of Chile that they use it. Okay. This one is a snapshot of the the different financial institutions that have, if you see all of the universities in Latin America have public funding, but only 3 countries have these innovative formats. Think about in your own countries how your funding source, funding structure is, and let's see if you could start using this type of instruments. Okay. So looking from the demand side, we have grants that are merit-based or need-based, loans. Traditionally, governments guaranteed these loans, and you have income contingent lines of credit. I have a personal disagreement here with my colleagues in the presentation. There's a study that the World Bank issued that says that students that receive education for free have very little incentive to finish. And they're trying to demonstrate the case that students that have a financial student loan has a better incentive to finish on time. That's true. However, if we look at the extreme, if that financing mechanism is not tailor-made to really help the student, we can have the case of a professional that has a very high qualification but is paying their debt for 20 years. And that, I think that there's a balance there between financial inclusion, access to higher education, but with a big burden. It's like going to work carrying this heavy weight every day. So let's think about mechanisms that could be, the government can have a program where they provide a guarantee, and in case of when you come out you don't have sufficient resources to pay, the government can guarantee to ensure that the bank gets their expected return, but you as a student, you don't get that, you don't get the penalty for not getting a job that has of a higher salary that you need to pay for the loan, and then you end up with that for many years. So these are some of the examples that are happening now. As you can see, interest rates vary, tenors vary. So again, this needs to be designed taking into consideration the local job market to ensure that you're not creating this incentive for students to continue getting education. The case of Argentina is very interesting because there's only subsidies for sectors that are considered strategic for the Argentine economy. So as you see, the whole point of this is that when you're devising these strategies, it has to be very close coordination with the government as a key stakeholder in making sure that your financing is ensured. Well, I don't want to get ahead, but more importantly, you need to start forging alliances with private sector. So that's, I think, the next. So now let's continue from and I'm going to be very brief because I already spoke about this. It's very important that we provide the students with the right information. Without information, students don't make the choices. And what we found in our studies is that the information barriers tend to be more relevant for low-income students. Why? Because these students have less informed parents, and they have less access to counselors in their schools, right? So again, we see is this vicious circle that continues to happen. So we need to think about ways to improve the information directly. Let's help these prospective students make good choices so that we tackle the enrollment concern. And we could also do it indirectly through licensing or accreditation, which is also an incentive for institutions to be more accountable. What information do students need to make decisions? The direct information that I'm talking about is very simple. Provide the students with the rate of return on particular study program. let them know that if they spend $10,000, I'm making numbers here, right? If they spend $10,000 in their education, most likely they will have a better chance to earn $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 when they graduate. And what are the potential markets that they can tap into? I always find that students are walking their journey blindfolded. And it's very difficult. You're making a leap of faith and walking blindfolded, hoping that things will happen, right? And of course, they pray, and something happens, and miraculously, 70% of them make it. But then there's the other 30% that are not getting the rate of return that they expected when they started. We need to rethink on the funding options and the funding mechanisms for them with full disclosure, to ensure that the graduation rate and career options in the chosen field is the right one. But more importantly, looking into the labor market needs. As mentioned earlier, I'm a lawyer, and I have colleagues of mine who are driving Ubers. Why? Because there's not enough clients for attorneys in Mexico to tap into. If the market has sufficient lawyers, why are we pumping more lawyers into the system? So that analysis needs to happen at a country level. Right? So that's something that administrators can do. So that's a big challenge, but that's something that it's very into your realm of power and accountability. So you can do this to make sure that universities provide with the necessary skill sets that are important to the economy of your respective countries. So I've spoken on direct information and indirect information. What's the impact of quality assurance systems to prospective students? Well, it's also as important as a direct one. Rankings are important in the selection-based. Almost all countries have quality assurances. Some are incomplete because they have low coverage, and they're rarely related to financial incentives. The information is not publicly available or easy to read. When it's available, it's very difficult to read. And not all are accredited. This is a snapshot, very quick, of what's the systems of quality assurances in Latin America. Again, Argentina, Chile, Colombia. As you can see, some of them are public bodies, some of them are private bodies. But I'm not getting to. If you want to see more, I invite you to read the report. It has a lot of details on how it's prepared. I know that Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, Suriname, they all have accreditation bodies. And I know that because they're the only countries that we work in IDB. Unfortunately, OECS countries, we work through the CDB, so we don't have a lot of data. Now, I mentioned the information that is required to provide enough information for students to make the right choices, what mechanisms there are, indirect. But I cannot stress enough the importance of having partnerships with private sector. This one will have benefits. We have here student, employer, and country, but I would like to add that it's also important for the university. It's also important for you to maintain relevancy. Let me conclude very quickly. Higher education is expanding. We agreed, right? It's expanding, but more needs to be done, especially to give greater opportunities to low-income students. The goal should be to expand access while maintaining quality. For that, we have grants and loans that need to be available, especially for students for lower incomes. More innovation financing mechanisms need to be created and used. Prospective students need to have more information and more orientation and guidance to make better choices about their future. Quality assurances through accreditation leads to better quality programs, and definitely there needs to be more collaboration between private sector and business to ensure that they're more relevant programs. Government and institutions themselves should continue to promote the expansion of access to higher education, but at the same time, they must guarantee quality, equity, and relevance. Universities play a crucial social and economic role You are not a silo. Technology disruption is disrupting the way we work now, and for sure, the future is not going to be the same. Universities need to be agile to remain relevant. You have to be at the forefront of innovation by promoting expansion of access of quality in close coordination with private sector so that you can create your own virtual circle. Thank you so much.